Welcome to the Embryo Adoption Podcast. I'm your host, Mark Mellinger. On this show, we explore the possibilities embryo adoption offers to families often struggling with infertility, though not always. Through insightful interviews and moving stories, we uncover the blessings of this unique path to parenthood. This podcast is brought to you by the National Embryo Donation Center, giving hope to those longing to grow their families. Now, let's get started.
Well, we're so glad you're with us today. And as a reminder, before we get started, if this podcast is helpful to you, we would love it if you would spread the word by giving us 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts or by subscribing and following the podcast wherever you happen to listen. Share it, let people know about it, and we thank you that so many of you have already done that. Looking forward to this conversation. It's not necessarily going to be a fun one, but it is going to be a helpful one. We're talking about experiencing loss and disappointment in embryo adoption and moving forward in the face of that. And I'm so blessed to have Tamara Martin, the executive director of the nonprofit organization Arrows in the Sky, with us for this conversation. And Tamara, it's great to have you here. I guess we'll start with this. What are some common emotional challenges that will come up for families who experience either an unsuccessful frozen embryo transfer or a pregnancy loss during embryo adoption, both of which are fairly common?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, for me, my trade is statistics. And so that's kind of where that all started for me, is that I saw the numbers, but never expected to be the number or to meet the number, the statistics and the faces and the families behind the losses. And so I think the emotions that come with those losses are something that you cannot understand or describe unless you've been through it. So knowing that your heart's desire is to build your family, the thing that you grow up seeing, it seems so easy. It seems so natural, like the next progression in your step of marriage and life. And when that doesn't come as you expect, it truly feels like it's not supposed to be this way. You're questioning, the very things that you grew up understanding. Maybe it's your faith. Maybe it could be, is this what I'm supposed to be doing? Am I supposed to be a mom or a dad? I feel very called to this. And so we see that a lot in these circumstances, in the families that we serve, questioning their very, maybe even existence. Right now it's Mental Health Awareness Month, right? And so we see how impacted these families are through these circumstances.
What's the worst part of it for you? I mean, we'll get into your story just a little bit.
Yeah. So for me, I guess, like I said, I never expected to be part of this statistic. I think from the moment that you have a desire to have a family, especially as a mother, you start loving that future. You start loving that dream. You start imagining what God has in store for their life. And so as soon as we knew that we were pregnant, that was it for me. I was already a mother of that child. I already had all the plans in place, all the dreams and hopes in place. And so when that was taken away from us, and though it was very early for us, it did not deter from the amount of pain that we felt. We knew that was our child. We knew that they were, had opened their eyes to the face of Jesus. And thank God that we knew that. But it did not lessen the pain of not getting to live their life, experience who they would be, who God would call them to be. And so I think we recognized that. And then very shortly after, we saw multiple families in our community experience that, which is kind of how we're here today and why Arrows in the Sky even started.
And I'm really looking forward to talking more about your ministry, and we will get to that during this conversation. How far along were you, by the way, when you lost your child?
So when we found out, we were 5 weeks, and then when we went in, we were 8 weeks, but we had stopped growing at 6. So very early on, we had to continue to wait. In hopes that, that flicker of a heartbeat would become more of a strong heartbeat. And it didn't. It was very obvious, when we went back. But like I said, that didn't change the loss for us. It didn't matter if it would have been 40 weeks or 4 weeks, if it was a chemical loss or an early loss, it was still hurt the same. It still was the desire of having a family that we immediately we were shaken to our core.
Mm, yeah, that's the best way to put it, shaken to the core. And another hard part of this is that spouses tend to grieve differently. What have you learned about how spouses can support each other? And we're relating it to embryo adoption because that's what we do, but this would be really for
Right.
any sort of pregnancy loss or disappointment.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think that a lot of times, men feel the desire to be strong, right? That's how God created them to be this like strong support and foundation in their family. But what we have found out is that because of that strength, and thank God for that strength, they often feel like they are not allowed to grieve. They're not allowed to, feel the same emotion that maybe their spouse is feeling. But what we learned and what we shifted to was that we need to recognize that dads need to know that they are able to grieve, that they are able to, you know, have this same hurt affect in whatever way that they feel. Sometimes, for my husband, I remember we went and planted a tree in our front yard because to him, that was his first child. That was our first child. And so we didn't want to forget that or allow the world around us to keep moving and nothing to grow in its place. And so we always, walk outside our front door and get to see this beautiful bush blooming in the spring and the summer. And it reminds us of like that life that once was living here. And so for us, I think fathers, if you take that opportunity to say, the loss that my wife is experiencing may be a little bit different than how I'm feeling, because for a mother, the second the pregnancy test turns or even the desire of having a child happens, I think the mother's love starts instantaneously. And maybe a father's kind of it's like, what am I expecting? It's a little bit different for a father, but I don't think it dissipates what he's feeling as a dad, especially for the men who feel called to be a father.
What advice do you have for couples who are thinking about moving forward after a loss like that?
Gosh, it's hard. I'm not going to say it's not going to be hard. I would say that it is one of the most difficult things you could do, whether that be um, from a failed IUI or a failed IVF transfer or from a failed adoption or a loss. The I guess the best way to say it is that your innocence was taken, and moving forward from that is very difficult because you see these pregnancy announcements and they seem so simple to say we're expecting, 6 months from now, we're going to have our little baby. But it's not that easy for families. It's not that easy for 1 in 4, for 1 in 8, 1 in 160. Like there are multiple families that you will encounter that experience this pregnancy after loss. And so for them, I encourage them to find a community. I encourage them to, dive into some resources. We love to provide resources that walk through this. I think for me, my favorite package that our team sends is a pregnancy after loss or infertility and just saying you survived, because truly it's the longest 9 months of someone's life because you're holding on to, is this going to be a viable pregnancy? Is this going to really happen? It's been taken from me. Maybe it was once, maybe it was 3 times, maybe it was multiple times. Trying to really have faith and just cling to, there is a story. I'm not the author, but I do know the author. And just really clinging to that. I mean, that's all you can do as someone who has experienced loss, knowing that God is in control. And for us, we love to be this army of people surrounding these families and just praying and encouraging them through it. I mean, that's all you really can do. You can't take away the fear. You can't take away the anxiety, but you can just remind them, hey, you're not in this alone.
And he only writes good stories. That's the thing to
Amen.
remember. But I know that can sound also very tone deaf when you are going
Hmm.
through it. Just hopefully families can at least keep that truth in the back of their mind because they will come back to it at some point when the loss is not so fresh and it will be comforting then. And let me ask you about this, Tamara. Do you think it's any different with embryo adoption? I can being involved in this as long as I have now, I've seen families who have asked, "Oh, gee, did we choose the right embryos?" They sort of put pressure on themselves. Did the doctor do something wrong with the transfer? I think that does make it a little bit different with embryo adoption. It adds sort of a layer. Would you agree with that or no?
Yeah, you kind of feel like you're in control rather than, it being God's in control. But truly, I feel like that is something that you need to step back from and say, hey, God brought me to this journey. He knew exactly what he was doing. He knew exactly what he was doing when he laid on the hearts of people creating the National Embryo Donation Center, right? Like he laid out that mission and that desire for this to be a place for babies to come and to, be held with, so their families were there and they selected them. And I don't think it should be something that they should take lightly by any means. But I do feel like that we know that it's orchestrated. We know that that little baby has a purpose. And what a wonderful, wonderful journey that they get to be on, that they knew, that they traveled, or this baby traveled miles to be with them, to be, for them to be their parent. I sat the other day in the doctor's office. My son was very sick, and I have him in a baby carrier. There's this mother that's on the other end of the doctor's office, and she's talking, and they're talking back and forth. And she said, "Oh, Miles." And I said, "Oh, I love that name. I love that name, Miles." I said, "We almost named Ellis Miles." She said, "Thanks. We had to travel a lot of miles to get him." And then proceeded to tell me this story of how this little baby was an embryo. And I thought, I cold chills, right? Cold chills of knowing that God had orchestrated that moment to remind me that these families, they seek miles, they go miles to create this life and this desire to fulfill this hope and this dream that they have. And so how beautiful of a moment was that? I was so thankful for that moment. I had to share that with you, that little God wink. But to take it back, I do think that these families, although they may feel like they have this heavy burden of this choice, I think that if they are sensitive, they're sensitive to what God's called them to do, then there's no wrong decision.
Do you recommend any particular timeline for a couple who has gone through, and especially like an embryo adoption, if you have a failed embryo transfer at some place like the NEDC, we can generally get you in for another try in the next month or 2 months, probably at the most, if you really want to do
Yeah.
it. Do you have any recommendations on the timeline for deciding whether you move forward or not?
I think it's different for every couple. I don't think that there is a correct answer, but I do think that there is a time that you need to know that you need to heal from this, because a new baby, a new embryo, a new adoption, it's not going to heal the hurt. You're not going to forget all of a sudden what you have went through, right? Your heart is not going to just suddenly not be broken. But when you get to a place where you've made peace with what's happened and you're able to say, we are doing this not to cover up hurt, but we're doing this because it's the desire, I think that a family would know.
Tell me the rest of your story after your loss.
So for us, we experienced that loss, or it was the end of the year. And so I spent the next few months very discouraged, very hurt, sitting in an empty nursery, which it was an empty room, but sitting in that room, finding myself questioning, I could have sworn, God, you've called me to this. I could have sworn I have the desire to be a mother and my husband the desire to be a father. But I also knew that he had called me very young at the age of 16. I felt that I would be doing something for his purpose, and I didn't know what that was. And I found very shortly after that calling was the purpose to serve families. And although I was angry because I felt like, God, you could have called me to anything. You could have called me to Africa to be a missionary. Why did you call me to the loss of a child? That seems very unfair. But at the time, I wasn't seeing that there was such a purpose for his pain. For the pain that I was experiencing, there was glory that could come from it. And so I think once that kind of revolution happened for me, I started healing. I started being able to have that communication about, what does this mean? How can we serve families who have walked through these circumstances? How can we serve families who have experienced infertility? Because I look at every church corner, being from the South, and I see a church here and a church here and a church here and a church here. But what I didn't see was a place that people that were broken from the loss of their child, from infertility, from the loss of an adoption, I didn't see them being served. And to me, that felt like God was like, the door's open. This is where you need to be. This is where you need to step into. So that happened probably April.
So talk about the mission then of Arrows in the Sky, how long you've been around, what your mission is and what you're doing and how you're doing it. It's a terrific ministry. And like you said, it's come about pretty quickly.
It did. Yeah. So we experienced our loss in 2020. So the end of COVID, when everyone was finding themselves very isolated. And 2021 came around and things started to kind of amp back up. We were kind of allowed back into church, right? And so we started on a Wednesday night sitting around the table saying, how can we serve families? And by Friday, we got a call that a family that had went through a stillbirth the year prior, had a IUI and resulted in a failed, not a failed, but had lost at 12 weeks. So that was like a 2-day turnaround where we were saying, okay, what do we do now? It's 2025. Last year we served 250 families. This year we've already served over 100. For us, we don't really, yes, we have a mission. We say we want to serve families walking through, pregnancy loss, stillbirth, infant loss, embryo loss, infertility, whether it be primary, secondary, pregnancy after loss, pregnancy after infertility. Those are where we're at now, but we know that God doesn't, when we put him in a box, he doesn't get to bless you the way you allow. So we kind of allow that door to be open, whether that means, serving families in other scenarios, but we just really want to show up. That's what our desire is, to show up, to spread hope. We send these boxes to families that are walking through these circumstances and just say, you're not alone in this. We see you. We see whether it's a loss or it's infertility or it's pregnancy after loss or infertility. We see the proof of miracles. We see that God is in control. And we just want to remind them of that. So that's really our mission.
Tell me more about the resource. Yeah, it's a great explanation, but
yeah.
Tell me more about the resources and how people, what's in these care packages.
Yeah.
And I know you have different care packages for different scenarios as well. And how do they get to the people who need them?
Yeah. So every care package comes with specific resource like grieving material, whether it be books or, personalized cards written from our ministry team, from dads, from moms, depending on the circumstances. There's keepsakes for them to keep with them. These are very unique. I don't want to say that they're not personal care items, because I definitely think they help with your mental health, but there's something a little bit deeper. Like we didn't want to be surface level. We wanted to really get to the heart of where these people were walking through these circumstances. Um, and then a few other like special touches depending on what that box is. So depending on if it's a personal referral, which we often get, and those go across our, sometimes even into Canada, or they're within our OBGYN offices local, maybe fertility clinics that are local, women's health clinics that are local to us as well. They'll have those packages already there, and they're ready just to hand that to a family that's walking out their doors so that they immediately have something to connect to. They're immediately, surrounded by a community that has walked through their waters, and is ready to really embrace them with hope.
So do different groups or family members or whomever go to your website and pay to get these packages?
They're totally free. So we're a nonprofit. So everything that we send out is totally free of charge. There's no obligation. There's no circumstances, no stipulations, no, faith-based requirements. We just say, we want to send you hope. And that's what shows up at their doorstep. Now, obviously, there's ways they can support our mission and they can support a package and sponsor a package. But we didn't want there to be any reason that someone wouldn't have the opportunity to have hope in their hands.
Yeah, and it's obviously we're a nonprofit too, so we want people to support the NEDC, but hopefully most of you have room to support multiple ministries. So we would also commend Arrows in the Sky as a great nonprofit to support. So tell me a little bit about the name and how people can find the resources, check them out for themselves online.
Yeah, absolutely. So with Arrows in the Sky, it obviously, it started from our pastor, and we joke with him. He now sits on our board, and we say, who thought a 14-letter name was a good idea? Because anytime we have to have events, we're like, this is too long. We need big marquee letters. This is so expensive. But it, came from the verse in the Bible, because we do recognize that, errors in the hands of warrior, and we wanted to draw to that and to remember that the desires of people's hearts to fill their lives with arrows, to fill their lives with this joy of children. We didn't want to stir away from that. And so from the very beginning, that's what we really established ourselves in. And then as far as recommending or reaching out, they can always visit our website at arrowsinthesky.com. There is a simple way for them to request a package. Hopefully they find our packages in the NEDC, and they find those in the very offices, and they're able to hand those over directly to those families, because that's really what we want to do, right? I feel like we have the same vision. We're serving these same families. And so they should know that from the time that they walk through embryo adoption or embryo loss or adoption loss, whatever the circumstance, that there are people that are praying on their behalf, and that they're not walking through this alone. So I think it's exciting to see this, God connection. I think in the beginning, before we even started this call, how it kind of just happened naturally, how God was like, hey, I need you guys to connect, because you both are doing my work. Now let's do it together. So I think it's really exciting to see the work that you're doing. It's really miraculous to see how you're serving families and providing life to these little babies that may have never had that opportunity.
Two ministries with very much the same heart. You're 100% right. So again, that website is arrowsinthesky.com. If you're listening and want to check it out, we'd recommend that you do that. So Tamara, tell me what your family looks like today.
So today we have a little girl named Noah. She is our rainbow baby. She is 3 years old. And then we have a little boy named Ellis, and he just turned 1. So it's very exciting. We're very much in the busyness of life, but they get to come with us. They get to serve with us. They know that, I may have on a logo for Arrows in the Sky, or maybe I'm writing a card, and my little 3-year-old gets to ask me, she'll say, Mommy, did someone lose a baby? And we get to have this talk. We get to have these conversations about loss. We get to have these conversations about hope, about heaven. And I think because of what God has called our family to, my husband and I, our kids get to see up front that there is a hope of heaven. They get to see, faith in action. They get to see what it means to be the hands and feet of Jesus and to serve. And so I'm grateful for that, the little family that we have, though it is, built from pain and built from hurt and loss. And that we know we have a little baby in heaven. We know Poppy will get one day to be reunited as a family, that our little earthly family is going to leave a legacy, hopefully leave a legacy along with others who serve on our team, to these families that need it the most. Yeah.
Did it help you to name your child who passed
Absolutely.
so young? Yes.
Yes, 100%. There was no questions. There was no questions, because for us, that life existed from the moment, well, before we knew, right? God knew. So from the moment we knew, that life existed to us. So there was no question for us. There was no, oh, this baby that we lost early. I mean, that's our Poppy. That's our baby. We knew that there was a life, and that's all that mattered to us.
What final word of hope would you offer to someone as we close the podcast? Would you offer to someone who is experiencing the grief of either infertility, or I guess particularly the pain of pregnancy loss or stillbirth, or something along those lines, infant loss, any of those things that are all sort of broadly under one category? What would your big word of hope be to that person whose future is, you can't offer the hope of knowing what the future is going to be, of saying you're going to have children in the future, so they have to have something to cling to? What would that be?
I think, yeah, absolutely. So I think that if I could tell them one thing, it is the verse that we cling to as a ministry team, which is Romans 12:15. We rejoice with those who rejoice, and we weep with those who weep. And though your time may be in the weeping, I do believe that there is rejoicing coming. And so I hope that they can cling to that though they may be in a season of feeling unseen, of feeling like their circumstances are unfair, that there will be a day come where they feel like this is reconciled. They feel like their heart is, whole as it can be on the side of heaven. And that I know that there is a community of people that will love them through it.
Amen. Great note to end the episode on. Tamara, thanks so much for joining me on the Embryo Adoption Podcast.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you so much for listening to the Embryo Adoption Podcast. I hope you enjoyed learning more about this life-changing option for building a family. Hey, if you or someone you know could benefit from embryo adoption or donation, visit embryodonation.org to get started, or just to find out more. Again, that's embryodonation.org. And don't forget to spread the word, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast app. Join me next time as we continue sharing inspirational stories of the embryo adoption journey. And until then, take care.